and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
I'm Ollie Whitfield.
We are joined today by Jason Bay. Jason is the Chief Prospecting Officer at Blissful Prospecting. He helps reps and sales teams who love landing big meetings with prospects, but hate not getting responses to their cold emails or feeling confident making cold calls. Jason, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm excited. Yeah, it's going to be a little different from, I think, any other podcast that I've done. So I'm excited to dig in.
And I know you run your own podcast as well. So let's just start with those who don't know you. Walk us through a little bit about your sales journey and kind of who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, so I got into sales sort of accidentally, like most people get into sales. And this is in 2007, 2008. I was a freshman in college, and I was actually going to school to be a forensic scientist. So I watched a lot of like CSI. Was very introverted. And there was like a forensic science.
You were part of those millions
of
of people who went into forensic science thinking it was going to be all CSI, and they realized it's nothing but lab work and it's really boring.
Oh, it's nothing but lab work. And there was like two of them in the entire state of Oregon. Not a lot of things apparently that need to be analyzed there. But someone came into my classroom, a guy named Barry. He's my best friend now. And he's talked about a company, College Works Painting. Here in the United States, what they do is they essentially hire college students to teach them how to run a house painting business. And a big part of that is marketing and sales. But they basically said, hey, do you want to make $10,000 for school? So I was like, yeah, sign me up, And I ended up getting hired with them. And the springtime rolls around. I didn't really understand that I would be going door to door, actually. So the very first thing I did was I bought a book on sales, a little bit book of selling by Jeffrey Gitomer. And then I bought a book on painting to learn more about house painting. And I was really good at it. People always ask me, like, what did you struggle with? And like, not to sound like an asshole, but like sales came pretty natural to me, actually. Like the door-to-door stuff, I was frightened to do it. But as soon as I did it, was very good at it. Recruited a bunch of my friends, to help me with it. Barry, the way they train you is they're supposed to do 5 estimates with you. That takes 10 hours to do a 5 estimate day on a Saturday. You're supposed to close you a job. He didn't close me anything. And then the next day I went like 3 for 5 by myself, So I was like, I love sales, But that's how I got into sales. I did really well. I sold like over $100,000 worth of paint jobs, made like 27 grand for school over the summer. So I was like, I love sales, But when I started getting into sales, this is maybe a topic for today. I noticed there was like no one that looked like me in sales. No one in my family was really in sales. My mom did a little bit of, kind of like insurance kind of stuff, but she was mostly a stay-at-home mom when she was raising me as a kid. And I just didn't really think of that or see that, and especially we kind of talked about this off air, like getting into business too. I didn't really, that made me want to get into sales and be an entrepreneur, but I didn't really see a lot. I didn't think that was something that Asian people could do. You know what I mean? Because all the stereotypes are very true. And I'm half Chinese. My mom is Chinese. My dad is, just kind of a normal white guy. But my mom's side of the family, it's like, hey, go to school, pick a job with a great salary, be a lawyer, doctor, like whatever, kind of stuff like that. But that's how I got into sales. I don't know what else you want to get into, but that was kind of my first sales experience. And some of the things, like kind of thinking back, that I didn't really even know any better, like growing up in a small town, that like once I started to meet other minorities, especially, I was like, oh, interesting. Like no one does this like kind of work that I'm doing. And there was also this Marcus Chan mentioned this when you guys interviewed him. There's this very, I was kind of raised like this too, where a lot of Asian culture is kind of like just be quiet and like kind of like it's very subservient. My wife is Korean. Korean culture is not as much like that, actually. But so there's kind of like don't stick out kind of thing. I really related with what Marcus shared actually around that. So it's kind of like in this weird conundrum with sales because I'm like, I'm like this shy kid. I'm introverted, but I'm also like Asian, and like I feel like Asian. What I'm taught in that culture is to not really try to stick out too much. So it was kind of like a weird mindfuck, really. Of like, I like doing this stuff, but it kind of goes against a lot of like what I see. And I don't see a lot of examples of like other people doing it.
Oh, I'd love to know. So you said you were way better than the average that they taught you, that they said that you should be with the painting work and going door to door. Why were you so good at that? In hindsight, what did you do that just worked so well? Was it natural?
Yeah.
Did you have a you think the book was like a huge part of it, or was it just your natural way of doing it?
I think it was a couple of things. One, it was I grew up in a small town of 6,500 people, Brookings, Oregon. And in Brookings, Oregon, that's where I drove home. I drove 2.5 hours every weekend to go run my painting business. So I think being in that town, I was valedictorian, I was in sports, I was in the newspaper. I think a lot of it was like, people kind of knew probably who I was, even though I didn't know who they were. The other thing I think that made me feel very comfortable is I'm like, when you give me a task, like I didn't know that sales was a job that I could do. Like I never thought about like, oh, you could do something that's like pretty results based, right? And that's how they kind of pitched it to you. Is like, you ever work a job where you work the same amount of hours as someone, but you bust your ass and they don't, you get paid the same amount of money. That was kind of how they pitched it, right? And that aspect of it where I'm like, hey, the better I do, and like the skill wise, the better I am at going door to door, the more leads that I'm going to get. And the more leads that I'm going to get, the more estimates that I can do. And the average paint job is $3,000. Every time I close one of those, I get about a quarter of it in profit. Like the math just really made sense to me. I'm one of those people, like I'm not good at making money for the sake of money, but if there's a really clear path for me or there's a purpose for the money that I'm making, I can really kind of like push past a lot of the fear. So even though I was like introverted and stuff, I was in a band in high school and I played electric guitar and I performed in front of people. I still did stuff like that scared the shit out of me. You know what I mean? And this is like one of those things where I could be monetarily rewarded for it. So I think that's really what helped. And then also just, I'm a very by the book, kind of guy when it comes to a lot of stuff, not as much anymore being a business owner, but they had scripts and all this other stuff. It's like, hey, here's exactly what you need to say. I'm like, well, it worked for a lot of these other people. Let me just follow this system, So yeah, those were kind of the things I think that helped me early on.
Interesting. So I'm fascinated by one. I also grew up in a not quite that small of a town, but what felt like a smaller town, and that community. It's really cool actually that your first experience in sales is actually selling to your community versus selling to total strangers, because for me, selling to people I know is 10 times harder than selling to people I don't. I from, my years in theater and stuff like that, I always told people who I knew, like, you're not allowed to sit in the first 10 rows. I cannot see you or it will freak me out, So the idea of going door to door in my own neighborhood sounds like my absolute worst nightmare of a sales scenario, the same way like selling to my friends, even today, like if I'm approaching a CEO or CMO or whatever, who's a friend and being like, hey, you guys want a sponsor or something? Like that's terrifying. You push past it, but it's interesting kind of how that could have acted in your favor too, because it was like, oh, it's Jason. Of course I'll open the door for Jason versus, oh God, it's a salesperson. But I want to kind of go back to this idea that, because I think there's two issues here. And you said you were open to talk about your experience as an agent sales pro, which I can't thank you enough for being open to doing. But there's two things here that I think are interesting to unpack. One is this idea that you didn't see anyone who did it, who looked like you, therefore kind of felt like it wasn't a career. Combined with this idea that there were a set number of paths that were common in the culture. I can resonate with this a little bit because both of my parents come from a very specific sect of Christianity that has a very similar push to certain careers. Anyone who's listening who knows what Seventh-day Adventist is, both my parents were raised Seventh-day Adventist and I've got ministers in the family. Both my parents left, but so I wasn't raised in that, but my cousins and everyone were. So my entire family are doctors and nurses. And the only other path really for people is lawyer or teacher, doctor, nurse, lawyer, teacher. Those are like the 4 careers. That's it. So it's a very, I'm familiar with the pressures of like, all right, which one of the 4 are you going to be? Of course, you're going to go get a master's. Of course, you're going to go get a doctorate. What do you mean you're not getting pre-law? What do you mean you're not pre-med? Like it's strange to people. And I remember even going to college myself when I declared for political science, everyone's like, oh, she's going to be a lawyer. Nah, no, I am not. But you start this little side hustle, you realize you like it. What was that moment where you went, this is my career. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Especially given you went in thinking you were going to be forensic science. What was that switch like?
Yeah, it was instant. Um, there's like this like short in like business to consumer sales, there's this really short feedback loop, right? It's like I could talk to someone at their door one weekend or on a Saturday. Sometimes it would go like this. And they'd be like, yeah, why don't you come by later today or tomorrow and give me an estimate? And then I could close it for $3,000. And then we'd paint it over the summer. Like the feedback loop was really short. So there's like a lot of like, you could work really hard in the prep, but there was like almost like a feeling of immediate gratification that I was just like addicted to. Because what I secretly craved in my life growing up was like approval. So I craved it so much. Like all of the popular girls were with like white guys. You know what I mean? All of the movies that I saw were like really good looking white guys. So I wanted to be white. Like I wanted to be Ryan Reynolds. You know what I mean? that was like what I saw. So I just secretly just really craved a lot of validation from people, from teachers, from women, from friends, from my coaches, from my parents, like everything. And sales like gave me that, like it gave me that because like I did really well and I got a lot of approval from the people that I worked for. You know what I mean? Like a lot. And it was instant. Everyone likes you when you're like, I was the number one manager in the state. You know, I finished like, I think 19 out of like 800 people nationwide. I did really well and got all of the approval, you know, from the people that it really mattered to. And like, I just didn't see a lot of people that looked like me. And it wasn't until I got the approval, which didn't take that long, where it didn't really matter. Like I just kind of ignored it, actually. It's not something I've really thought about until I married my wife, Sarah, 3 or 4 years ago now. And, she's Korean and she very much embodies her culture. And like, I actually have a lot of pride around being Asian now. I didn't before. And this is like maybe in the last six or 12 months, kind of thing. So I kind of just pushed it all like aside and down and like including my emotions, my feelings, like all of that stuff. And then through therapy in the last couple of years, that's when all of that stuff's kind of like trickled back up. Where I had to be like, you know what? When I felt like really crazy all those times for like looking different and like being Asian, like I invalidate, I don't know if that's the word, for it, but like when I was feeling it at the time, I just told myself that it wasn't because I looked different and was different than other people. It's like that's not happening because you're different. That's just like they don't mean it or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, dude, people called me chink all the way up until like high school. You know what I mean?
Oh.
Like as a joke. And I took it as a joke and it always bothered me, but it was like, oh, they don't really mean anything by it. I would justify it for them. You know what I mean? So,
I gotta say, I
yeah.
know exactly what you mean because it took,
Yeah.
and I've spoken about this before. I am very, very fortunate. I'm a white woman. I'm a white cisgendered, happily married in a heterosexual marriage white woman. The only thing I've got against me is the fact that I am a woman, and that's not nearly as much of a disadvantage as it used to be. There are situations where it can be a pain in the ass, and there are situations where it's an advantage. But I know exactly what you mean, because if I look back in the first few years of my career, there were several situations where something happened to me and it was, in hindsight, horrifically sexist, but I blew it off because, but people they're not actually sexist. I know them. They're nice. They've been fine. It's not a big deal. They like me. You can't be sexist to someone if you like them, sort of thing. It's so easy to look back on it and go, because it's easier in your brain. It's just easier to go, no, I'm not hurt by this, than to say, no, that hurt and it's wrong. And now I have to go do something about it. It's a coping mechanism, and it sucks, but it's really true. And I can't believe people were using chink. Like that one. I mean, no, I'm sorry. That really sucks. Like, I mean, that was something that went out of, like, people knew not to use that in the 80s. And we're
Yeah.
talking early aughts at this point.
Yeah. And it was, kind of the way my mom, because I would tell her this stuff, and my mom had it pretty bad because she was born in Hong Kong. She moved to the United States when she was like 3, and then she lived in a rural town in Oregon. you know, so it's just like
those of you not familiar with rural Oregon, there were parts of rural Oregon that wanted to secede and form their own state/country called Jefferson. It's fascinating. Look it up. Rural Oregon is special.
The city I grew up in, Roseburg, Oregon, they had like hang that N-word when Obama got elected. There were people carrying those signs in that town. So, so like my mom though was like, it's more like, just ignore it. Words don't hurt. So it's like, I'm getting this like, it's nothing against how I think that's like the only advice my mom knew how to give at the time,
And it was a different time.
And it just reinforced.
There was nothing. Yeah. There was nothing she could do at those points.
And it just kind of reinforced that it's like this happens, and it's like it's just a part of life. You just it's not that big of a deal. Is kind of the thing. So like all of that stuff just kind of, and especially looking back, a lot of it makes more sense now. Like I said, after having gone through therapy and like actually thinking about more of it. But I just didn't see, to kind of bring that part full circle. I just didn't see a lot of people doing like sales and like running businesses that were Chinese, or any other kind of Asian. But the validation like really was what I wanted more than, because I did feel welcome because I performed well. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. I was addicted to sales immediately though.
When was the first time you met someone that you felt like you could identify with? It doesn't, maybe it's just a friend or somebody like that, or when was the first time you found another person to look up to as well in that same vein of thought? Who were those people?
Yeah. First person. God, I don't know, man. Like I want to say my wife is the first person. Like really, this is like, we met like in 2016. I had like a bunch of, so for a short period when I was from 2010 to 2014, I did live in Orange County in California. And all of my friends down there were either Asian or Hispanic, I didn't really look up to them necessarily in that regard. God, it's probably my wife, man. And then seeing her like actually embrace her culture, and because we met in Portland, I'm about to actually move back to that area here in like 3 days. I'm in Austin now, but seeing her like really embrace that, like it made me feel like it was okay because it was also encouraged, for me. So, dude, that's probably it. That's probably it for me, actually. I don't really have a lot of other examples or anything that it comes to mind, honestly.
So what does that do when you don't have, just walk through? I'm curious what that does to like your mindset, because it's one thing to look up to, to find people to mirror your style off of or something like that. It's easy to, of course, map it to someone who you can connect with. But when you're by default connecting with people who are not of the same experience as you, what is that like? How do you figure out who to start with, who to look up to, who to idolize, and does it make it easier or harder?
Yeah, well, this is why I had such a because that College Works painting company, I worked with them for like 7 years. I was a salesperson for them, and then for the rest of college, I was a sales manager and hired people, and then I was their marketing director for 2 or 3 years. And that brings us up to like 2013 when I left and just wanted to do my own thing and consulting, and how we got into Blissful prospecting now. But I was always very, very driven, like at the cost of not my friendships, because all my friends were people that I worked with, but like definitely significant others and people I've dated. Like all of that came second. And I felt an immense pressure that if I did not perform work-wise, that I wouldn't have the thing that I needed in my life to get like validation from people. So like for me, the way to make up for being different and like Asian when I was a kid, like I can think in sixth grade was, dude, I'm 6 feet, 180 pounds. Like I'm like a decent size, you know? So like the kids I played football and sports against, I never got picked on physically because I could kick their ass, like if we're being honest, you know what I mean? So it's like when kids would like fuck with me, there was always that kind of thing. So they didn't really mess with me much, but I knew I had to be really good at sports. Otherwise, I would just get tormented. You know what I mean? So, and then when I became an adult, it, like being good at sales and being good at my job was kind of that thing too. Like I can make up for a lot of how I feel about this by just kind of ignoring it and putting it to the side and just being really, really good at what I do for work because that's going to get me the approval that I want. You know what I mean? And doing what I do now, like getting into sales training, that's a whole nother thing. You know, where it's like, you know, you guys interviewed Marcus. I'm friends with Marcus, and dude, that's the first thing we talked about is like, dude, what's it like? 'Cause he grew up in Oregon also. His parents had a Chinese restaurant. That's how he grew up. My grandparents had a Chinese restaurant in a small town. So it's like, you know, like he's the only other person I know that does what we do. That's like, I can't think of another Asian sales trainer or coach. And if there are, like, I'm so sorry for not like knowing who you
We're
are, but
looking
it's
for
like,
you. We're really looking
yeah,
for you. Please
yeah, you know,
help
because
us
I
find
even
you.
like, yeah, because getting into that, I'm like, well, shit. I look at the people that do this, you know, and it's like they're all white guys, man. You know, and there's some, you know, some white women, but it's like a lot of like, look at all the sales books out there. All the top selling sales books are like older white guys. You know, so like I had those doubts. I don't really have them as much anymore because I got a pretty good support system around me. But it's like, dude, can I do this? Well, people want an Asian guy to come in and train their like white sales team. You know what I mean? Like I would think about that kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, it doesn't really mess with me as much anymore because of like I've worked with some like really cool clients and like our business is doing really well. I've had some like really cool collaborations with people and like all that other stuff. So I don't think about it as much anymore. But it was definitely part of like this imposter syndrome that I felt for like a lot of my life, you know, around like how I look and my you know, my ethnicity and that sort of stuff. Like even down to like I wanted to play college basketball, but like I'm like I don't see any Asian guys like playing basketball in college. You know what I mean? So it's like and that trickled into sales. So
This is pre Yao
yeah.
Ming.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when he played, it was like a big deal, you know, like, holy
Yeah.
shit, there's like, you know, and then there's Jeremy Lin. You know, there's like two basketball players, right? Um, but there's like kind of this pressure to be, this is like another thing I wrote down, like, um, when I was thinking about this conversation is like this pressure to be a model Asian, you know, like that's kind of, and that's why I think it's so weird for people like Asian people to come on this podcast and talk about it is because you almost feel like you can't because you're like you look at the stats and you're like, well, Asian people supposedly with those bullshit stats have the highest IQ in America and make the most amount of money. You know, however right or wrong any of those stats are, but that's like what you see,
IQ is
right?
skewed, but my income is straight from the IRS. We know that.
Yeah.
That's real.
So it's like you have this like kind of uh, pressure that like, hey, you do get treated differently and people look at you differently. Like when I go back to my hometown now, I go to the grocery store and it's like it feels really weird because like when I go in there, like feel like everyone's staring at me. My wife feels incredibly uncomfortable going to the hometown that I grew up in, you know, and so there's like kind of this like weird thing where it's like I almost feel like the only hesitancy I had about even coming on this was like, is it okay for me to even talk about this? Because I'm like, well, there's a lot of black people out there that have it pretty bad. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't want to take anything away from that. You know what I mean? Because I don't feel like a lot of this stuff for me has been a disadvantage. I've just really leaned into it. And we talked about this before we hit record. It's like,
Yeah, so
you
let's
know,
kind of just to prompt a little bit there. You know, we talk, you know, kind of is being a let just point blank. Do you think being of an Asian race, Asian ethnicity has been a help or a hindrance on balance in your sales career?
I think it's been a hindrance to my mental health, but I think it's been like very good for my sales career though.
Well, that's a
Like
fun contradiction.
I literally believe that people see me and they see an Asian guy that like, it's like from my perspective, I think I look like the most non-threatening person, to these people. Like when I knock on their door, when I cold call people, they can't really see what I look like, but I think about it. You know what I mean? Um, so I think it's helped get me sales. And there's a bunch of weird stuff that goes on there that we can talk about. But I think the hindrance has been more for my mental health and this like, and again, I don't really feel it quite as much anymore, but this like intense desire and drive to like, I have to be very good at what I do in order to get approval from people. Cause like, I'm not going to get it for the other things, kind of thing.
Net, would you say that it's leveled out then? The disadvantage versus the advantage, or is it slightly one way or the other?
Yeah. For me, I think it's an advantage now. Yeah. I think that like I wouldn't have therapy's really helped me process like a lot of this kind of stuff. So without that, and then also having my wife that's into that kind of thing and like mental health, and like we talk about it, and she's Korean too, so like she relates with like all of that stuff, so now that I have that, I don't really feel like it's too much of a hindrance right now for me.
So let's kind of think back to early in your career, or maybe early in your career, or people who are early in your career. We know, based off census data and the state of sales survey, that Asian Americans, looking at the US exclusive, because that's the data that I have. Yes, I'm aware it's very skewed. But for now, we know that in general, people who identify as Asian make up 6% of the US population. Now, that does include, according to the US Census Bureau, Indian, certain Pacific or Southeast Asian identities, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's not a great number. We also know that in sales, Asian is actually the one race that is actually overrepresented in terms of the national average. So actually, people who identify as Asian make up 11% of sales pros, according to the state of sales survey that we did last year. So that could be skewed due to the inclusions of these other populations. We're going to break that out this year. But I'm curious from your perspective, Jason, and being a member of the culture, is there anything that sales leaders can do to fix the mental health, that cognitive dissonance of the culture versus the success and the need for that validation? What can we do to better support our brothers and sisters in sales?
Yeah, this is such a
What would have helped you, if nothing
Yeah.
else? Because we don't have all the answers. So if nothing else, like what could have helped you get to this point of acceptance and love of yourself or whatever? Earlier, obviously, I appreciate you being so open that you've done therapy. I think that's an incredibly important thing. Cannot say enough for doing the work that's needed for that. I think anyone who has the ability to take advantage of that. But I mean, aside from that work, what could we do at work to offset those challenges to help more Asian sales pros thrive and be comfortable bringing their full selves to work?
Yeah. Man, this is such a hard one. Like what I would have appreciated, and I've tried to do this with any women that I've managed and Black men that I've managed in sales, is trying to like really let them know that I want to know what it's like being in their shoes, and that I'm a person they can talk to about this stuff. And like, I'm not going to pretend like it's not different for you, you know? I remember I was, with that College Works company, like I remember I was managing, because I went to Oregon State at that time. So we'd have like Black football players. And you talk about like hard going door to door, 6 foot, 210-pound shredded running back on the Oregon State football team. Like old people were scared of him.
Yeah.
And he's the most friendly looking, like charismatic guy like you could imagine. And just like first glance, people were just frightened. You know what I mean? So I think that like having the conversation of like, hey, like if you feel like things are different for you because of like how you look or your name or your accent or whatever, like I just want to let you know that you can talk to me about it, and like I really want to learn more about what that's like so I can support you, and want to know like I think that's really big. You know, if there would have been more of that, if there also would have been less joking about me being Asian. So just less joking about like, hey, when we go to the grocery store, we go out to get something and you see the, you know, Chinese pork or whatever, like you don't like make a joke about it to me. You know what I mean? Like little shit like that just like really wears on you after a while, you know? And it's like, oh, it's funny, like I can laugh on it. But like all of the just jokes about me having to be Asian, like this is shit that I was like extremely self-conscious about growing up, you know? Like I didn't even want my like we ate like kind of like a weird like Americanized Chinese style growing up because my dad was white, like I said. So like replace like potatoes with like rice. So it'd be like a steak, rice, and then some sort of vegetable, right? But it's always like white rice was like the starch. When my friends would come over, I never wanted to eat rice because I was like ashamed of like it for whatever reason. Like I just thought it was like weird and they would think it was weird, right? So like that's like the type of shit that like comes up when like when I was like in college or like whatever, like early on in sales, when there'd just be like little jokes like that, you know? So it's like that I think is like totally unacceptable to do. Um, Less of that would have been great. And just like people just like sitting down, like really wanting to know what it's like, um, to be like the person that's like different than everyone else. You know
I
what I
think
mean? Like different looking. I think like taking it like an interest in that would have been really big.
it's really important. You mentioned something in there I want to call out because I think it's super important. This idea that you can laugh at something and still be offended by it.
Yeah.
You can laugh at something and be laughing and still be hurt. So
Well, what am I supposed to do? I'm not going to make it
exactly.
awkward. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to be like, come on, you guys, that's not funny. Cause then I'll just get made fun of more, you know, or I'm going to be the party pooper, you know, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So it's like that's one thing that I wish that people would know then is just like that little stuff. It may not seem like that big of a deal, but that compounded over time, it just like fucking just eats at you. Like it just gets like, and like every time that happens, I'm like, are they going to call me a chink and think it's funny and that's okay? You know, like, is that going to happen? Like, it's because it's so close to that.
Would it have been helpful if
Yeah.
someone who looked like Ollie or I had stepped in and said, nah, man, you can't, don't make those jokes.
Yeah. Anyone stepping in, regardless of how they looked or their gender or anything like that, would have been helpful. Yeah. So, you know, and I'm very comfortable talking about this with, you know, white people, like white people, you know, like I'm very comfortable too. You two have a genuine interest in like learning about it. So it's like, to me, that's like the intention is really big, you know, with that. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. Those are the two things that like, you know, as I think about it, you know, like I would have wanted. And then the other thing too is that, if for whatever reason, if you're a small business, small sales team, and you're not able to really hire for as much diversity as you would like to, because that's not practical for a lot of businesses to be like, oh, cool. Well, we just need to hire 4 more people of color and we're good to go, or 4 more women. Like a lot of businesses are small. They're not in that position.
If your sales team is 3 people,
Yeah. It's a little,
try,
it's a
but at
little
the same
impractical.
time,
But what you could do is, and I'll just give you a silly example because this one comes to mind. If you have a black person on your sales team and 2 white people and all white leadership, ask if a Morgan Ingram or someone like that wouldn't mind being a guest speaker for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and talking about what it's like being black in sales. You know, like I would totally do that. Like I would totally, if someone wanted, oh, what's it like being Asian in sales? I would totally spend 10, 15, 30 minutes like talking to a team where there's like that one Asian person that everyone just doesn't like get it. Like, so I think as a sales leader, you can do that kind of stuff. You may not be able to hire for it, but what kind of people can you network with and leverage your network for to put people that look like them in those positions, you know, especially leadership positions. And it's, dude, people need to see people that look like him. This is why I watched so many Jackie Chan and Jet Li movies growing up, you know, because I'm like, these are the only people in media that I see that are successful. Like I want to be like them. They're the only people that look like me. You know what I mean? And I think that's so important.
Police Story is no joke one of the best movies ever. I adore that movie.
Yeah.
I can like recite it. Well, not recite it.
Yeah.
I don't. But I can recite the English dubbed version.
Yeah. So I think those are 3 like pretty practical things that you could do as a sales leader or any kind of leader, if you're trying to, like really make the people that work for you feel more at home, at least the Asian people.
So let me dig into that bit. So I want to try and understand what your mind is doing when you're saying those things to your, you could say, rep or your team members.
Mhm.
So you approached them and you said, look, if you feel like you're different in any way from whatever the variable is, you can talk to me about it. And I think just saying that to some people works. For some people, it doesn't. That's just how they're built. But I want to understand in your mind, how did you disarm and reframe it? Because it's still a painful thing to talk about, whether it's to you or to somebody else. They have to have the right mindset. So how did you take it from being a problem to being like a safe space, an empowerment thing? I think the way you described it was, I want to learn more about the way you experience it. So if that's the way that you said it to them, I can see that being, if I'm the person on the other end of that. Oh right, yeah, I want to. I can teach him something. I have something to share to him. I can help him understand that. So in a way,
Yeah.
you've totally reframed it. How else did you approach it? Because, like I said, I can imagine that some people
Mhm.
are just going to be quite uncomfortable. You're going to get into, you as the manager might not know what to say about some of it. None of these things really have a easy answer. How
Yeah.
are you coping with that going into it?
I think it's no different than objection handling in sales. I have a framework that's called EVO. It's empathize, validate, offer. It's the same thing here. The best way to disarm someone is just to listen and empathize with them and then validate it. I'm thinking specifically of this guy, the black gentleman that the running back at Oregon State. He told me, he's like, I knocked on this door and this like lady thought I was like, she was scared of me. And I was like, oh man, that must have like, dude, that must have sucked, man. Cause you're like, that wasn't why you were going there. Like, so what happened, man? How did it make you feel? Just like let him talk. You know what I mean? And then the validation piece is, I did this with women a lot too, especially when I was in college managing, kids running house painting businesses, because women, you go in there, you're a 19-year-old woman, you go in there and say you're selling house painting services. And you're like, oh, really, miss? Well, you're going to paint my house. Okay. Like that kind of
Okay,
thing. They don't
little
take me
lady.
seriously because it's like a construction trade or whatever. So like what I would do is just like, hey, like the validation piece I think is so important. It's like, hey, like you're not crazy for feeling that. Like that tension, that thing that you felt, that woman being scared of you, or that guy asking you a lot of questions and like really digging in and you felt like you had to objection handle around this, like you're not crazy for that. And if you're comfortable talking about it, like there's specific things that we can work on that with women that I've worked with in the past that we try to overemphasize to correct for this thing that's like really kind of unfair. If you want to talk about it and like talk about those things, we can totally do it. And if not, I'm happy to support you either way, kind of thing. That's how I've always dealt with it. I think that being a minority myself helps also, if I'm being honest. I think they see a person of color and they're like, because I have a lot of stories to share. The best way to disarm anyone is with empathy, like just really sitting, and I'm on a huge kick with empathy just through COVID and like all this other stuff with prospecting, especially, but being able to just think about what it's like to be that other person and just sit for a second. Like I think probably everyone in the world to some extent has felt left out for whatever reason or felt judged in some sort of way, right? So you may not be able to relate with being black or a woman if you're a man, or being Asian if you're white or whatever, but you could probably sit in that feeling of like what it's like to walk into a bar and everyone looks at you because you look different than everyone else in there. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And I think empathy is the best way to really disarm, people. Just listen, let them talk, try to sit in their feelings and really validate that, and then come in with your suggestion or wanting to learn more or whatever it is, that you're doing. But yeah, I think that's empathize, validate, offers is kind of the framework that I think applies to a lot of life outside of sales.
It does. I have a very similar framework I use with a lot of my clients. I might steal yours because I call it I say validate, educate, question. And
Oh,
that's like
cool. Yeah.
that's what I say. That's what I say. It's like, especially with competitors, is really
Yeah.
useful because it's validate. Great. I'm glad you are investing in this solution. Educate. Here's why we're different. Question. Ask
Mhm.
something that highlights something that's not good about the other product, but without saying that product sucks, because you never want to that doesn't build empathy. That just makes people
Yeah.
feel silly. But wrapping that up, we're going to end this episode as we do all of our episodes. Jason, it has been so much fun talking to you. So we're going to now move on to the lightning round, series of rapid fire questions. Nothing too heavy, just designed to get your quick reactions. So we'll start with our classic. What's your morning routine?
I keep it pretty simple. I wake up at 7 o'clock. I try to put the cell phone on the other side of the room. So I got to actually get out of bed to do it. I go meditate for 10 minutes and then I let my dog Pepe out. I make coffee and then that gives me maybe 30 minutes to just do whatever I want to do. I try to have 20, 30 minutes in the morning where I can read if I want to. I can just look at articles. I could watch YouTube videos. I could read a book that I'm interested in reading about. Like that's like just kind of like me time to get the day started at 8 o'clock. So I try to keep it really simple.
Aside from your wife, if possible, who is somebody who has had a huge impact on your career?
Oh, there's been so many. I would say a big one for me lately, I would say, is Jeff Bajorek. Rethink the Way You Sell. He's got a podcast, The Why and the Buy. And the last like year and a half or so, I met him not last October, the October before, and I met him at a conference here in Austin, Sales Success Summit. And it was at a time in my life, I remember meeting him because we kind of knew about each other, but never talked. And I was like, do you have this problem where you don't really know a lot of people that do what we do? And he was like, no, actually, I don't, Jason. And he just, over the next 6 months, introduced me to so many other coaches, trainers, consultants, like people that are doing what we're doing. And I just did not have that at that time in my life. And it was really, really hard because I just didn't feel like anyone knew what I was going through from a business standpoint. You know what I mean? And it's like, people are so critical sometimes of self-promotion, which I think is so stupid, where it's like, as a coach or a trainer or a consultant, you're like hesitant to talk about how people can like purchase your stuff or hire you or like do this other stuff. And it's like, you got to give and put out this content. And I'm like, why don't you go fucking run a business where your content is the business and we'll see how much free stuff you give out. Cause I still give out a ton of free shit. You know, but don't like give me shit for promoting my $300 course. You know what I mean? So I think like having people like that like you could relate with that like do this to make a living, that was really big for me.
Yeah, I have to quickly plug Casey Jones, our co-host emeritus, does a ton of stuff working with founders and entrepreneurs on exactly these issues. If you're not following her, you're probably not listening to this, but you really should, because she's got a lot of good stuff she's doing with that, with exactly on the idea of why does self-promotion and self-branding feel icky to so many of us? Not alone there. And she's got some really, really fun stuff with that. But back to something more fun. What's your pump up song?
Oh, my pump up song is Return of the Mac.
There we go.
Can't go wrong with that.
If I need to get in a good mood, that's my cold calling song. That's my wife will put that song on in the car if I'm not feeling good, you know, kind of thing. So Return of the Mac.
Now
for
it's
sure.
stuck in my head.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm gonna go listen to that when we're done here. That's a good one.
Yeah.
What's something you wish you'd learn maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago?
I wish I would have started therapy sooner, actually. And the
Yes.
big thing that I, you know, long story short, the big thing that I have learned through therapy is actual like empathy, like what that is to like really think about your feelings and someone else's feelings. For the longest time, because I just didn't want to draw attention to myself, I really pushed down a lot of my emotions. So when really good things would happen, never really overly celebrated because that would draw attention to me. And then when really bad things happen, never really, you know, really sat in that emotion. So I really kind of like muted a lot of my emotions and it was just kind of like this all the time. And because I didn't really understand my own feelings, it made me not like think about other people's feelings. And I've actually been told earlier in my life that I can be very cold, not in a mean way, but where I just don't really sit and like think about like what that other person's emotions are and just be really kind of cold. So I wish I did that a lot sooner.
What's your favorite sales or business book?
Oh, my favorite sales or business book. God, there's a couple that come to mind, but Compound Effect by Darren Hardy was really good. There was this exercise he recommended where I'm not really into like manifesting stuff in like a weird way, but like manifesting stuff, like being really intentional with like what you're going after in life. That's how I think of manifestation. One of the things he had was write a list of all the things that you're looking for in a partner. And the next part of it was, you got to become those things. You know what I mean? Like you will attract what you are, kind of thing. And I shit you not, that list that I put together, I showed my wife around the time that we met when we got married, and like that's like her, like on that list. It's pretty crazy. So that book's really good. I also like another book by Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, is a really, really good book too, for just like, you know what? Like sometimes we care way too much about stuff and what other people think, and you just you can go too far in that direction. Sometimes you just got to do you, kind of thing. So that's another really fun book.
Name one way someone could have been a better ally to you.
I think it's what I mentioned before. Just someone being like, "Hey, Jason, I know like a lot of people hang out with like, make like little Asian jokes like here and there. How does that make you feel, dude? Like, what do you think of that? Like, what do you think of us doing? Does that bother you? Like, if someone would have done that, that would have meant a lot."
What's one way you're working to be a better ally for others?
One of the things that I am trying to do is more stuff like this. Just speak out about what I believe in, and make it more inviting for other people to talk to me about it. So speaking out, and I put out a post during Black Lives Matter, and that was like a big deal because like normally I don't like write about that stuff, and like I'm not like really out like publicly with like how I feel about it. I sent an email out to our list, like that kind of stuff. I proactively wanted to talk to like especially more Black people in sales about that. So it's something I could do a better job of, honestly. But I still have fear around that, so being more public with stuff and doing things like this is what I'm working on.
What's your guilty pleasure after a bad day or a deal that didn't close or a rejection or a cold call? What'd you pick up?
My guilty pleasure, I do listen to Nickelback. That's definitely a guilty pleasure. But I've seen them in concert 8 times, by the way.
Just
I would
8.
say, yeah.
That's a choice.
That's a record.
Yeah. My guilty pleasure is it's not something I do very often. I just try not to eat as much red meat these days, but getting a nice like 16-ounce ribeye steak that's like dry aged, spend like $20 on a steak, and just like, searing that thing on an iron cast skillet with some butter and some garlic and some thyme and rosemary. That's definitely a guilty pleasure of mine.
Might be the most, pardon the expression, red-blooded American thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I like a big slice of meat.
Yeah.
I love it. All right, Jason, thank you so much for coming on and bringing your whole self to this. This has been absolutely delightful. How can people find you?
Blissfulprospecting.com is the best way. You're going to find a couple things. There's a resources page. We got a ton of free stuff. So we got a podcast. I post daily about prospecting on LinkedIn. There's guides on video prospecting. We have a reply method guide for how to structure cold emails, all kinds of cool free stuff you can find there. Everything's focused on outbound. So how to cold email, cold call, sequence, objection handle, all that stuff to get the first meeting. And then we help individuals and companies as well. So if you want some training or coaching around outbound, make sure to check out either our boot camps or the programs that we have for companies, and we can help you out there too.
Brilliant. All right. If you enjoyed this show, please consider sharing it with your friends, commenting on social media, and don't forget to like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference in our visibility and the ability to share these stories with more people. Don't forget to check out the new revitalized Other Side of Sales Twitter, OSOS_pod, our LinkedIn and Instagram at Other Side Sales. Jason, this has been delightful, and look forward to hearing more from you soon.